Today on the Remote Work Life podcast.
I left the office on the day I signed the papers, sat in my car and went, right, I am never going to employ anyone ever again. And I'm never going to have an office ever again.
Famous last words.
Famous last words.
Hey, it's Alex Wilson-Campbell here. That was the voice of Matthew Stibber, who is the owner and managing director of Articulate Marketing. Articulate Marketing is a digital marketing agency for B2B tech companies, and it's a completely remote business. And that little interesting segment that you just heard, that little snippet, was part of our conversation where Matthew was talking about how he made that transition from becoming the owner of a bricks and mortar business, in fact, a bricks and mortar software development business, to becoming the owner of Articulate Marketing, which, as I said, is fully remote. And in our conversation, it's a fairly wide-ranging conversation. We talk generally about how the business has evolved, how they're recruiting more people, some of the challenges that they have there, and also the transition to becoming a B Corp, which tells me that the business is very much about putting people first. And that's partly why I wanted to have Matthew on the program. So enjoy the conversation. As ever, I started out by talking to Matthew, or at least asking Matthew about how it all came about. So enjoy the conversation and let me know what you think.
Articulate Marketing, 20 people, remote working, specializing in B2B technology. How did I end up running that business? Well, I'll tell you a funny story. In the 90s, when I was much younger than I am now, I set up and ran a computer games company, and it got to about 70-something people, and I sold it in 2000, and I left the business. I left the office on the day I signed the papers, sat in my car and went, right, I am never going to employ anyone ever again. And I'm never going to have an office ever again.
Famous last words.
Famous last words. Well, the funny thing is I kept one of the promises and I broke the other. I have employees now, lovely colleagues, but I don't have an office. And so if you want to know how kind of the germ and the genesis of Articulate, it was really out of that moment where I didn't want to have an office, and I wanted to do something where I could work from home initially, and as the company has grown in the last 4 or 5 years, work from home and let other people work from home, or coffee shops, or whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. So the reason that I didn't want to have an office was it was very expensive. And, we had 10, 11,000 square feet, and we had, receptionists and cleaners and air conditioning and maintenance and security people and all this stuff. Bloody rates, all this, writing checks all the time. But there's a sort of a hidden cost to it as well, which was that you have to sort of hire people who can get to that office, which means suddenly you can't hire the best people. You have to hire the best people you can, who live within a reasonable commute, and that was a limiting factor. So I walked out of that games business, and I thought, right, I'm not going to hire people, and I'm not going to have an office. And then I thought, what the hell do I do now? Because I hadn't had any thought about it. I'd started the business when I was 18, and I had not really a moment thinking that I thought they'd carry me out in my coffin. So I sat there and I thought, well, I've sold this, I've got nothing to do, and I was acted decisively and creatively and imaginatively. I went and had lunch. And then I went for a walk and I thought about it for a bit. I ended up spending the next couple of years sort of as a bit of a dilettante writer, and I wrote for Wired and Popular Science and Director, and I learned to fly, and I started reviewing business jets for an American magazine, which is, nice work if you can get it. And off the back of that, after a couple of years, started getting the occasional corporate job, including one, bless them, with Microsoft. And Microsoft has been a client since 2003. And it started with me setting my games company and thinking it would be a lark to become a writer. So that's the genesis of the company. How did it become how it is today? 4 or 5 years ago, I broke the first promise and I hired somebody, Liz. my chief happiness officer now, as she is today. But when I hired her, she was my PA. And so her career has developed over the last 7-8 years as the company has grown. And then I started hiring writers, and now here we are, lots of people doing lots of clever techie writing and marketing stuff for tech companies. Does that help? Is that a good answer?
That's brilliant. That is great. And I think the genesis of it all, as I can't say the word, genesis of it all is very similar to many other people I've interviewed, actually, in terms of, you want to give opportunity for people who aren't in the immediate vicinity. You want to be able to, work from home as well, work, I suppose, on your terms for much of it. And you want to provide a good service. And it seems you've been doing that since 2003 now. And has that always been remotely?
Yes, all the initial freelance writing and journalism was all remote. I've always worked from home since 2000. So, all remote. We don't have an office at all, and everybody who works at Articulate now is remote, and they're all over the place. We have I have a colleague in Bucharest, another in Vienna, another one who seems to flit around Canada quite a lot, but spends a lot of his time in the UK. Some up in Scotland, some in Wales, all over. And I think that's rather lovely. And they're an amazing bunch of people. It just is. And here's the funny thing. We as the business has grown and we've kind of got a little bit more, I won't say reputation, but a little bit more to offer and a little bit of a better story to tell for ourselves. It's incredibly appealing, this remote working thing. I mean, we get the last round of intern adverts we ran. Last intern recruitment, we had 650 applications in a month.
And is that typical for you? Because I mean, that's something that I get from speaking to lots of managers like yourself, lots of business owners like yourself. Is that when you put out an application, you just get inundated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because some people, doesn't suit everyone, want to work in this remote way, want to have that flexibility. I think for us, it's partly that. Partly also, I think, as we have grown, we've put a lot more emphasis on our company culture. And I'm beginning to think that is now coming across in the way we talk about ourselves and some of the things we do. For example, we have a chief happiness officer. In a company of 20 people, that's a very deliberate investment in morale, motivation, and engagement. And we became a B Corp last year, which means that we're making a commitment to our community and our stakeholders and to the environment, as well as to the bottom line. Obviously, as the owner, I care about the bottom line, but people want to belong to something that's sort of aligned with their values, and something that is going to let them have some flexibility and freedom. And the next thing that we're working on, we've been working on this all year, is towards investors in people. So we want to become investors in people certified by the end of the financial year. And what that talks to is making an investment in people's careers and in their development and their personal growth. So I think that all these things are interrelated, but it helps us. It helps attract people, and it helps build this amazing culture.
And how do you do? I mean, 600 applications on. That's like a whole lot of applications. How do you deal with so many applications in one go?
It's very hard because you want to give everyone a fair shake of the stick, and you also, in a small company, you don't have a lot of hours. I mean, literally, if you've got to make money and do client work and stuff, everyone's working at full capacity. So if I say, here, review these 200 CVs, and you go, oh, that's going to take me a few hours. Dividing up the labor. I do a lot of CV reviews. I think perhaps I've got quite an eye for it now in my life. I've seen so many. You develop some heuristics about CVs that are obviously inappropriate. I mean, a fair few of them are from. We do try to recruit in the UK or EU. So US applicants or Australian applicants, we can't. That's too far. It's too difficult. So there's a few simple rules like that. But once we get to a long list, and I suppose we had 35, 40 on the long list, we had to hire an HR consultancy to just pre-screen them and get the list down to a manageable number for interviews. And because we interview very intensively, we give people homework, and then they meet 5-6 people over a course of multiple interviews. That's a real time commitment for us. So we have to really be sure. But we had the most amazing candidates. Astonishing. We had a woman who we hired in the end, who'd done a TED talk, for example,
Wow.
and had been a head teacher. And she was just looking to explore a second career in marketing and writing. And despite having been incredibly successful in her educational career, just said, well, I will come and work as an intern for you, and I'll learn something new. And if it works for everyone, I'll stay. And that, and I think that's the sort of thing that it's not just, we can work with somebody in Bucharest or Birmingham or Glasgow. It's also, for someone like her who has young children, who's looking for a change of career, looking for something that's a little bit more interesting and quirky and flexible, it works really well for her. And we've got something to offer for her. Or another example, we just took on a junior consultant, our sort of word for salesperson in some ways, although there's more complicated than that. Anyway, his life passion is parachuting, and he's a parachute instructor, and he lives now in the Netherlands, although when we hired him he was in Italy. And what he does, I'm serious, it's most extraordinary. He works all morning. He bases himself at an airport, sits in their cafe, works all morning, and at lunchtime, to relax, he goes and does a couple of parachute jumps. And then he works all afternoon, and then just to wind down at the end of the day, he goes up and does another couple of parachute jumps.
Well, I tell you what. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead.
No, I just think that's the most extraordinary thing imaginable. But that works for him, and now he is in a Dutch airfield doing his job, parachuting. Perfect.
I'll tell you what. I always ask the question on my podcast: what's the most unusual or exotic place that you've worked? The most unusual place I've heard so far is the Norwegian fjords. But I think that what you just said, that tops it. That takes the prize, I think. Somebody who goes parachuting on lunchtime.
Another recent hire we hired has splits her time between Guernsey and Valencia in Spain, and just the fact that she just wants to spend time with her family in these different places and doesn't want to come to London to work. But here's the thing: it's not all remote. We spend quite a lot of time and effort and money to bring everyone together. So there are regular meetings in London. We would probably have 6-8 a year, a couple of days each. Everybody we can possibly get to comes in and joins us. And we have some social events. We have a couple of days of training and discussion and planning or projects, and so that we try very hard to form the bonds that you get in a business. And I don't think it would save us any money if we're not doing it to save money. I think we spend everything we would spend on an office doing all this other stuff, having Liz and having the meetings and things.
Do you think that's, because again, that's something that a lot of remote businesses try to do. They put a lot of effort into bringing everybody together to have that face-to-face time, if you see what I mean. But is that something that you think is perhaps more important in a remote business as opposed to a co-located business?
I think it's important in both kinds of business, and it's one of my regrets that I didn't do it more at Intelligent Games, to be honest, and spend more time as a company together rather than as teams or as management. If you run a business, you spend an awful lot of time talking to the same people, team leaders, your bookkeeper, your accountant, your lawyer, this sort of stuff. And what the company meetings allow us to do is to kind of work and meet people who aren't in our team, who aren't in our day-to-day contact group. And I think that's very, very valuable. It sort of sparks new ideas.
And it's a great way to get to know each other. And I think another thing is that, as well as that, it's working remotely. You don't have that spontaneity, do you, in terms of conversation? Obviously, working in a collocated situation, you can after work you can go down the pub, or you can ask your friends, who's sitting next to you, what's the time or whatever it is. How else do you get to sort of like form those bonds and get to know each other?
The Liz does a really good job with that. She has all kinds of little schemes and things going on. For example, we have a book club. So we read a book and then we chat about it on Skype, on Zoom, and we have happy half hours. So everybody at the end of Friday afternoon, people go and get a drink and they whatever they want, and they sit in front of their computer and they have one of these sort of mosaic boxes of everybody talking and chatting, and there's a little bit of, and it's surprising. I deliberately don't join very many of them, not because I'm antisocial, but I think on a Friday afternoon they probably want to bitch and moan about me as much as anything else. And I don't want to be like the school teacher who tries to be cool by going to all the kids' parties, But I go to a few of them, and the people quite happily sit and chat for hours, and it's really funny. And so that's a lovely thing that happens. And we also have a company stand up every Tuesday morning, so everybody's on that call. It's as close to mandatory as we get. So there's lots of opportunities to meet people and do things, both video conferencing and otherwise. But we also have Slack, like a lot of companies, and that the bits of Slack that work very well are not the kind of businessy, messagey bits, but there's the sort of random chatter and the sort of nonsense that comes up. That's very bonding, I think. And we have a lovely thing that emerged spontaneously called the validation channel. We a validation center. We had a prospect that we were trying to sell to about 3 years ago. They were called the Validation Center, and what they did was hardware and software testing. It was a testing company. Well, we never won them as a client, but somebody in the company picked up on this name and set up a Slack channel called Validation Center. And so, whenever anyone does anything nice, people just say, "Oh, well done, Maddie, you did this," or "Well done, Alex, you did that, and it was really good," or "Thank you for your help with that." And it's not me making that happen sort of top down, employee of the month and all that stuff. It's incredibly organic and spontaneous. And I'm enormously proud of them for it. I think that it's a lovely, I think this is one of the things that I've been learning, because I'm an old fart really, but from the Gen X types that work in the company, they're very open with their emotions and their gratitude and their respect for people. And they, it's rather nice. I like that. So yeah, that's some of the things we do.
Well, I think you mentioned a word that actually sprung to mind when you were talking just now. Organic. Everything seems in your business to happen quite organically, and obviously you're managing your team, but they're for most parts obviously self-managing by the sounds of it, and they have their own activities, and you call them a free-range team as well, don't you? A free-range team.
That's funny. Yeah.
How did that come about? Is that because
I think a lot of that stuff on the About Us page, they just wrote that. And there's a little video on our About Us page that they made. And that was quite delightful, actually, because I just said, well, we wanted a video. And I hired a film crew for a day when we were having a company meeting. And I just said to a couple of people, look, just make a video. And they were in another room just making video. And they would grab people and go. And I had no idea what they were doing. And they just produced that video themselves as a team. And they also, and this I think is lovely, they made all the music for it as well. There's quite a musical group in the company, lots of different instruments and writers and things. So that sort of thing emerges very naturally. And what that's very helpful for is it gives me a sense of how people are. I mean, it gives me a sense of how they are when they're not trying to be polite to the boss a bit. But there's quite a lot of deliberate culture, quite a lot of deliberate work. And that doesn't mean that one has to be skeptical or cynical about it. I mean, I think all companies have a culture, but if you don't work on it and you don't think about it and you don't try and make decisions in the right direction, you get perhaps a hostile, a negative or neutral culture, or you get one where people are disengaged and cynical about it. And, I think Liz puts in an enormous amount of work just on sort of, you might call it pastoral care, checking in with people, but she also does formal surveys, and we have a tool called Workbot that does employee NPS scores, and that's amazing. So there's a sort of a numerical, data-driven backbone and a very sort of soft, gentle human front to it. We also, there's some odd things that we do that are deliberate choices, but people think that we have this organic culture, and sometimes people say to me, "Oh, you know, we're doing this new thing, and it doesn't feel as organic as it used to be." And then I said, "What do you mean by that?" And they'll tell me something that they think was organic and natural in it, and I'm like, I was in a meeting for 4 hours before we decided to do that. You know, we worked really hard, and you came in and you think that just is natural, how it just happens to be like that, and it's not at all. It's bloody hard work, you know. And we agonize sometimes over some of the choices, and God knows we make terrible mistakes and change our mind and do something different. A couple of examples: we have a model of measuring work. We don't use timesheets, and we have gone through several evolutions of this, but we measure output using a points pricing, points menu thing, and we ended up building an app to do this. So if you write a blog post, you don't go, I spent 3 hours working for this client writing this blog post. You go, you know, one blog post title, this client delivered on this date, and it gets logged, and there's a sort of a rate card for the work. So nobody is being measured by hours, but there is an element in which they're being measured by output.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And this has been, on some levels, that's really attractive. And you know, companies, people who've never worked in a sort of billable hours environment don't know what a terrible load of BS that is, and all the politics that can come with it. And they just assume that what we do sometimes is a terrible load of BS with a lot of politics that come with it. And I go, well, yeah, but it could be so much worse. So, but we had some fairly painful lessons as we sort of adopted that, and kind of thinking about the culture of how we use it, not to bill clients or to plan work, but how we use it to plan workforce, you know, how many people we need to hire, and how we measure people's performance, and what role does it play in appraisals, and so on. And kind of there's been some misunderstandings about it. So that's an example of something that looks from the outside now. If I told you the positive spun version of that, oh, we use points, we don't do billable hours, it's everyone logs their work, and we can do this and we can see that, and and it's very good now. It's a good positive thing, and it's people appreciate it, but it hasn't always been that way.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, you mentioned all those things about how your culture has evolved from the bottom up, and how you become a B Corp, how you're attracting the right sort of people. It does take a lot of hard work behind that, and I think from when I looked at your website, and I got the inkling as well that I wanted to interview because of all of that. I got a sense that there was something about Articulate that I liked, and I think a lot of businesses can probably take note of this, because if you look at articulatemarketing.com, there's lots of things on there. There's lots of information that gives you an understanding of who they are, how they work, not just what they do. It's all about why as well, why they do what they do. And I think that in itself has led to them receiving 600 plus applicants to a job, and a TED applicant, and people, building a team that just sounds, you've got a really cohesive team by the sounds of things.
We try.
Yeah, it's I have to take my hat off to you. And I think lots of people who may be skeptical about, putting together remote teams, this is a great example of the hard work it takes to build a team, but the fact that it is possible, and what the outcomes can be from all the hard work. And you mentioned, Martin, you mentioned some mistakes. Are there any other mistakes along the way that you perhaps, if you look back now, you think to yourself, actually, we should perhaps have taken a different tack to doing that certain thing?
There's an ongoing challenge, which is around discussing and capturing our culture. So, in 90% of culture is what you do, what happens around here. What instincts or preferences or principles you use to make decisions. It's not what's written down in a book, right? That's not culture. But there is value in writing something down in a book. There is value in trying to capture and distill it. You onboard new people and you kind of want to explain it. You want to put it on the website. It's a requirement for investors and people certification. And we have been through a couple of fairly lengthy exercises in the history of the company working on our culture and documenting it. And a couple of them have been very successful when we were smaller. The last attempt, and there were specific unique reasons why it didn't work so well, but it didn't work so well. And it ended up being feeling a little bit unfinished, a little bit uncomfortable. Not any like people were cross or cynical, but I think there were a lot of passionate views about things, and everybody wanted to put something into it, and a few people wanted to kind of like, I want the documentation to say this kind of thing, and I want it to say this kind of thing, I want it to be that kind of thing. And we didn't quite spend the time we needed just to land it. And as I say, there are good and specific reasons why that happened. But it reminds me of the obvious point, which is if you all of it takes work. You can't just blithely go, oh, well, we're going to work on Thursday on our company culture and write something down. I mean, everybody has opinions and ideas and thoughts, and everyone has in some ways it's a tribute to the fact that people are passionately invested in the future of the company. They care so much because in most companies, that kind of culture workshop stuff is like, so we what we've actually done is the woman who helped us with our company culture 3-4 years ago now has a full-time job doing something in HR in a very big corporation, and we've done a deal with her boss. We will give 2 days of marketing advice if we can have her for 2 days to run our culture workshop next year. So we've pulled her back in, and we're going to have another go at that to really try and dig into it. So that works. I'm looking forward to that. But you can't phone it. You can't phone this stuff in. I think that's the observation. You have to put in the hours, and you have to let people have their say, and you have to work through the pain a little bit. I think it's very easy to reduce pain by, for me, as the boss, by exercising my, I'm the boss and we're doing it like this. Whenever I do that, not whenever I do, if I do it solely for the purpose of bringing a difficult conversation to an end, that never works. You kind of have to lean into the pain a little bit.
And about culture, I mean, there's a big topic of conversation now in the remote world, not just the remote world actually, but hiring people that actually, I suppose, fit, or a culture fit. I don't like that expression, but hiring people that I just don't like it. But how do you know when somebody's right? Because at the top of the call you mentioned that not everybody is suited to remote work. That's one thing. But how then do you, from these 600 applicants, you've narrowed it down to say, I don't know, 10. How do you know who's going to work?
Right. You don't always know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but you don't always know works in two directions. Most people try to reduce the risk by hiring people that are more like themselves or more like people who've been successful, or relying on apparently objective factors like education or experience.
Yes.
When those things are probably easier to test in a CV or an interview, but they aren't necessarily indicative of whether someone's going to be any good. So what do we try and do? Well, yes, you're absolutely right. We're trying very hard to weed out people who are not going to be comfortable working on their own. So we give people homework for every interview. They have to write a blog, or they have to do if it's a sales consultancy role, they have to do some analysis on something. So we can see whether they're capable of hitting a deadline, reading a brief, understanding something, giving us something back. And we try very hard to do that before we've spoken to them very much, because we then look at their work. Another thing that we do is a very small thing, but actually incredibly helpful, on our applicant management system, we ask, send your CV, send a cover letter, whatever. But we ask 3 questions. For example, what are you geeking out about at the moment? And if you could be doing anything at the moment, what would you be doing? And they sound a little bit cliche interview questions, but what we're interested in is given an application form for a job that you might like to do, how much thought are you going to put into what you write? Are you going to write? Oh, the third one is in 280 characters, a tweet. Tell us why we should hire you. Which is a bit of a sneaky test of people's ability to write.
Easy said than done.
Yeah. So, but these questions, when I'm reviewing CVs, that's what I look at first. So I go to those questions, and if someone just leaves them blank,
oh dear, no.
If someone puts in something sort of vacuous, I don't like it when people mention bland TV shows, because it just doesn't show enough imagination. They're not engaged in the world enough that if it, love, what are you geeking out about? Love Island. What I want is someone who's actually geeking out about something, like really passionately. So we're looking for attributes of behavior and attitude and life skills. So we want people who are curious about the world, people who have the ability to self-motivate to learn a new thing, parachute jumping, right? People who are, got a bit of get up and go about them. People who've got for remote working, people who have their own hinterland, their own life outside work. They're not expecting work to be all their friends and all their social life. They have friends, family, hobbies, activities there. So, we're looking for that. We like it when we see good academics, but we don't hire on academics. But what that says to us is when people have applied themselves intelligently to something. But we haven't hired yet, because they won't release her from the. We wanted to hire and offered a job to a woman who works in the armed services, and not an enormous academic career. Went in at 18, but an amazing military career, and has had management and leadership training, has had writing training for her work. Very intelligent, very insightful about what she did. It came across very clearly in her CV, and it came across in her answers, and it came across in her cover letter. When the military release her, we're hiring her in a heartbeat. Same with our former head teacher. Actually she had got an academic thing, but it was in it's PGCE 20 years ago. That's not really a qualification for marketing, but a TED Talk, hell yeah.
Of course.
We'll hire that. So, we're looking for those kinds of things. And you can see it very quickly in a CV. Someone's actually done something interesting and had a bit of a life. Then we interview a lot. I mean, they meet a lot of people before we hire them. So one other thought.
No, please.
Wherever we can, we start people as interns. We give them 3 months on the job training. We put a lot into the internships, but it gives everybody a chance to see whether it's right for them before we commit to a full-time permanent role and they commit to full-time remote working.
And is your, in terms of your strategy, is it more of in terms of your hiring, that is it more inbound or outbound? Because I noticed when I look at your website that there is because I think when I first contacted you, I mentioned about the underrepresentation in tech, especially of women, and you've got your team is probably 70% women, 60%, is it?
Yeah, but if women are underrepresented in tech, and I think that is probably borne out by the statistics, and certainly I was talking to Angie about this, and women going into STEM subjects is very, very underrepresented. I remember in my computer games company, we had 2 women working for us, one woman programmer and a graphic designer, which was terrible out of at that time 30 or 40 people, but it was a representation of this lack of women coming in, lack of applicants, but it was enough for Cosmopolitan to write a feature article about them. So we were I don't know if we were the only computer games company in Cosmo, but we were certainly one of them, which I think is extraordinary. Even looking back on it now, it seems extraordinary that it should be so remarkable. But yes, okay, women are underrepresented in tech, true. I think there's a slightly less extreme but slight gender imbalance in marketing. And in my anecdotal experience of 15 years in marketing, there was probably slightly more women than men. So I think we actually we reflect our gender imbalances in our industry, not we're not doing a great job of getting women into tech. We're doing, an inadequate job perhaps of getting men into marketing. I'm afraid. I don't know. I have to be careful about this because I'm not sure it's completely true. It's only my instinct on this.
Yeah, I have a similar instinct to you, and I don't know. It's something that's close to my heart because I've got two girls who really are passionate about both not marketing, but tech. They kind of gravitate towards the tech things, and my family are in STEM subjects, and so it's something that was that I'd noticed about your about the visuals on your website. But I think you're doing a great job in terms of your team, building your business, growing as well. And just couple of last questions for you in terms of managing. I mean, again, lots of managers in general, they who perhaps in a co-located business, they have, I suppose, I don't know if it's mistrust when it comes to allowing people to work remotely, and there's still a bit of skepticism there, isn't there? What advice would you give to them in terms of, again, building a team? You've got 20 in your team, building a team that's, again, cohesive and is just right on the ball.
Yes. I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago, and I just saw it again yesterday, looking through an old blog. And the title was a bit provocative. Managers care about absenteeism, but leaders care about presenteeism. And the thought that rather glib headline sort of captures is, if you're a kind of insecure manager, the thing that you can control, and if you're insecure, you're interested in control, is whether or not John or Jane are sat in their desk at 6 o'clock working on your project. Whether they are or not, and whether it helps to have them there working late, or whether it matters if they come in at 10 o'clock in the morning and go at 7 o'clock, or come in at 6 a.m. and go at 4, or work remotely, but the thing that you can control is, can I see them? Are they there? And there are definitely, insecure managers who want that level of control, and I've come across them in my life. I've certainly heard about them. My wife had a manager who, if ever she booked a day off to work from home, would book immediately, like a call at 9 o'clock, to make sure she was sat at her desk,
Wow.
On some spurious pretense, and it would come up behind her in the office and look at her screen and see what she's working. And it all seemed a same sort of package of insecure, kind of control freak behavior. So I think the answer has to be something about trust. I think the answer has to be, I'm going to give up the control of hours and presence, and I'm going to gain some control through relationships, through trust, through expectation setting, by providing context, by having the difficult conversations about productivity if someone's output isn't as it should be, but assuming that they're going to do a good job, and assuming if they're working from home, they're working, right? I mean, and here's the flip side of that. If you force people to commute every day, and in London that means 10 hours a week commuting for most people. If you let them work from home, you're probably going to get most of those 10 hours for work. I mean, everybody you talk to who has to commute, I love working from home because I get so much done. The phone doesn't ring and I don't have to bloody commute. And then they feel guilty because they've got to work, they're not out in the office. So they work really hard. So, my experience is, you let people work from home, remote work, actually you get much more out of them. They're much more productive. So trusting in that. One of the things that we do, I think, as I mentioned, was we measure output rather than hours. And that's a very profound. The other thing that people find really hard to deal with, we don't set deadlines. So people understand sometimes when client work has to be done by a certain date, there's an event or a website launch or whatever. Well, that, if you're working on a project, what the key dates are, if there are any. And people understand also we have to deliver a certain amount of work for a client every month. There's a program and a schedule. But I'm not going to tell you need to do this by Friday, and then you need to do the next thing by Wednesday, and the thing after that by Friday. If I have set this up and communicated the context correctly, what needs to be done this week, what needs to be done next week, and I'll leave it up to you to manage your time, your schedule, your workload, your planning to get the right work done at the right time for the client. And that, I think, is... I try and explain this to some clients, and they go, I need deadlines. I want a table. When am I getting my? I say, you get it by the end of the month. It'll come. It's like Wagamama. You'll get it when it's ready, and you'll get everything, and it'll be fresh. But that's very. I think that's probably at the cutting edge of remote working right now for me, getting people to accept. And it's interesting because people come into the company and they want me to set deadlines for them, and I'm like, I'm not doing it. You got to figure your own stuff out. That's your workload. So, actually, this is, and I promise I'll shut up.
No, this is great. I love this.
That thing about setting deadlines, it can cause some stress for people, right? Meaning, if they've just got a heap of work and they don't know what to do first. And so we do have to do some training, and we have to talk to people, and we have to communicate about how to manage your task list and how to communicate with your boss saying, I'm not going to get that done because, or, I've got too much to do this week. I've got these 5 things on my to-do list and I can do any 3 of them. What's the most important thing for you, account manager, for me to get done first? Those those are life skills, and those are valuable things. Nothing is going to be solved by me telling you what your deadline is, except 50% of the time you'll miss the deadline, and then everybody will get stressed out about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, that was the voice of Matthew, this is the voice of Matthew Stibbe on the Remote Work Life podcast. He's the CEO of Articulate Marketing, and I would listen back to this. If you're in management, if you're building a remote business, then this is just gold, because it tells you about not just the trust issues, the culture issues, everything when it comes to building a remote team, building remote business, and one that has been successful for the last, since 2003. So have a listen back to this recording. Matthew, I just really want to say thank you for your time, and we'll be looking out for what Articulate Marketing is doing in the future. In fact, what's on the horizon for Articulate Marketing?
Well, we just launched an app last week, hubtoolkit.com. So anyone who's using HubSpot, it's a tool that makes HubSpot, does SEO and social media things in HubSpot more efficiently. And we're working on the new version of our Points app, which will eventually surface in our application turbinehq.com, which does purchase orders, expenses, and time off requests. Wow. So besides being a marketing company, we also geek out on this other stuff. And geeking out is what you can look forward to from Articulate.
Sounds good. And where can we find that across at articulatemarketing.com, or is there another domain that you want me to share with the audience?
Articulatemarketing.com has a tools page, and everything we do that's not Articulate is on there.
Matthew, thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you, and I'll be following and watching with a keen eye to see what Articulate Marketing is getting up to in the future. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you. So there you have it. That was my interview with the owner and managing director of Articulate Marketing, Matthew Stibbe. And I'd urge you to go and have a look at his website at articulatemarketing.com. And I thought that was a real lesson in what it takes to not only establish a remote business, but also to help that business grow. And it's very much all hands to the pump. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Listen out for future episodes of the Remote Work Life podcast. And as always, do say hello via LinkedIn. I've left my details there for you in the show notes. If you have any questions, let me know via LinkedIn. If you have any suggestions in terms of who you'd like me to interview in future episodes, then let me know. So have a look in the show notes, and I will speak to you next time.